Hello, I'm going to talk about fall vegetable production, especially about the planning side of it. This is a fairly short workshop, and I had a bit too much to say, so I thought I would make a handout, but then I came unstuck with that as well because the handout turned out very long, so I couldn't make copies for you all. So what I've done is I've got a book out here, and you can look at the handout. If you want me to email you a copy of it, I can do that. And if you want a copy but you don't have email, come and see me, and I can give you a paper copy. And after this session, I'll be hopefully selling some of these books that I wrote and signing them if you want a signed one. Okay, which way do we go? Yeah. So when it comes to planning, one of the most important farm implements is the brain. Before you can do a good sequence of planning steps, you need to be clear about your goals for your farm so that you don't set off in completely the wrong direction. I grow vegetables at Twin Oaks Community, and our goal is to provide a wide range of different vegetables and berries for our intentional community of 100 people, and to try to provide that produce year-round as much as possible, and to provide some that can be processed for future use. And so having that goal sets in place what we try to do. So then after that, it's a matter of planning the cycle. Planning is definitely cyclical, but you need to break into it somewhere, almost anywhere, and then each year you can improve on what you did last year with good luck. Oh, wrong way, sorry. I have to get a hang of this. Okay, so quite a bit of fall gardening and vegetable production is sometimes called season extension. So here you see some lovely long pieces of row cover. It's important with season extension to find the balance between the time and money and energy that you put in versus what you get out. It's very easy and worthwhile to extend the season a small amount just by buying some row cover and paying a bit of attention to the weather. But you don't want to get too carried away and try and grow things too much out of season. A bit like Rafi was saying with the ripe papaya, really. You know, you can spend too much money on heating or trying to keep things alive in a season in which it doesn't work. And it needs to stay being fun, right? So it's about extending the season without overextending yourselves, finding the balance between what you can do. It can be a valuable thing to do to extend the season because you will be able to keep customers for more of the year, and they'll come back to you sooner in the spring because they know that you're a farmer who has a long season of crops. It can also be very valuable as a way to keep skilled crew, staff members, and growing in the colder part of the year, it's not like doing summer all over again. It's not as hectic. It's going to be slower. The weeds will grow slower. The crops will not need as much work, usually. So what we use for our planning to keep us on track, we have a descriptive task list, really, a month-by-month list of jobs to do. We call it our garden calendar. And you can go to my website. I've been feeding this in month by month as blog posts, but just last week I gathered them all in one place. So you can read that there if you're interested in that. Maps of the gardens are very important. A field planting schedule. We're going to see a clip of that in a minute on the next slide, I think. So that you know, so you plan ahead so that you know, you can look at that each week and think, okay, this week I need to plant that, and that, and I need to prepare the ground for next week's plantings as well. And that makes life much easier on the poor old brain. We have a seedling schedule for our spring transplants. Won't go into that much today because we're talking about fall growing. We have a hoop house planting schedule that I definitely will be talking quite a bit about. And I find having a small pocket notebook and a pencil really helpful. I'm not one for the electronic gadgets, but I know there are some amazing electronic gadgets out there, and you might use those instead of a notebook and a pencil, but notebooks work just fine. So here's part of our, we call it our outdoor planting schedule. It's a field schedule. This is sort of August onwards. In the handout, I think I included August through December. So it's in date order, and we have a column for when we intend to plant something, a space to write down when we actually plant it, and then the crop and the variety, how many row feet we're going to plant. And for transplants, we have we feed in the spacing in the row and the spacing between the rows. Then we have a column for the location, so we plant the right thing in the right place, and that helps our rotations. And then that plants column is a calculation. It has a formula in it for the transplants. It tells us how many plants to take out to the field so that we can be sure of having enough good ones, because we don't want to be planting really poor quality plants out there. And then we have a little column that just says success, question mark. And when we're finishing up that crop, we'll either check that box, hopefully, or if something's gone wrong, we'll put a big cross in it, and then we'll write something in the notes column to say what the problem was. And this is a very important piece of our planning stuff. So as far as fall planting goes, the two challenges really, which I'll come to later, but the two challenges of growing in fall are, first of all, you have to beat the heat and deal with sowing in hot weather, or getting plants established in hot weather, and then you race around like crazy, and before you know it, the problem you have to deal with is cold weather coming in and keeping your plants in good shape during cold weather. So you're playing off both of those. So I will get to each of those later, but first off, I'm going to work through these three categories of outdoor crops. The first is the warm weather ones, the things that will die with a frost: the beans, cucumbers, zucchini, summer squash, cantaloupes, sweet corn, edamame. Then there's a whole big group of the spring and fall crops that traditionally around here we wouldn't be growing in the summer. It'd be too hot, but we can grow them again in the fall, and they will do sometimes better even than they did in the spring. So that's beets and carrots, chard and spinach, peas, lettuce, turnips and rutabagas, radishes, and then lots of these leafy brassicas. Also sometimes potatoes and scallions. The third category is cold hardy crops, which we can, perhaps with a bit of help, overwinter in the climates in this part of Virginia. Spinach, these are the ones that we do. Spinach, which we use row covers for, and then kale, collards, we just have out in the open. Lettuce we do with row cover. Carrots, cabbage, potato onions, they're kind of multiplier onions, and garlic. So first off, we'll start with the warm weather crops. I recommend planning succession planting. I have a whole other long slideshow about this. You can actually look it up. I put it on slideshare.net, and I'm going to put this one on slideshare.net after this, so you can view it again. Succession planting is about trying to plan your planting dates so that you get a continuous supply of that crop without any gluts or shortages. And the thing that makes this a bit complicated is that as the season warms up, the crops will mature faster. So in order to get, if you want an even harvest interval, like if you want a new row of squash coming in every 3 weeks, say, you can't just sow squash every 3 weeks. That won't work out because the later ones in the summer will mature faster than the spring ones did. So you need to shorten the planting interval. So how you can figure this out is to keep records, and also you can ask information of other local growers. And some of the information I have about our crops at Twin Oaks might be able to help you get started on that if you're not already doing that. So we call this making a good fit plan. So for each planting of each crop, you want to record the date you actually sowed it, the date when you started harvesting it, and the date when you decided it wasn't worth harvesting anymore. No, before that, the date of the last worthwhile harvest. And we've made a chart that we call the veg finder. We just keep this on the wall in the shed on the board, and it's rather small print there on the screen, so I pulled out an example square out there on the left. So that's the third planting of squash. It's going to be in our west garden in plot J, and we aim to plant it at 623, 120 feet of it. And so then we write down when we actually planted it, when we started harvesting it, and when we finished harvesting it. And then at the end of the year, we take that very important piece of paper and we use that information to make ourselves some graphs. So you make a graph for each crop and you feed in all the sowing dates and when you started harvesting them. The sowing dates go across the horizontal axis and the harvest start dates go up the vertical axis. And you start with you probably know your first possible sowing date, and you mark that in and the harvest date that applies to that. And then you figure out what you think is the last worthwhile harvest start date, and you mark that. And then you want to divide that harvest start axis up into even segments. And here we have this is an example of sweet corn on our farm. The dates in the columns on the left are from several different years. We certainly didn't go out and sow on the 25th of April and then the next day and then the next day, all in the same year. Those are from different years, but the more data you have from different years, the more useful the graph is going to be. And you can see from that once we put in our first harvest date and our last worthwhile harvest start date, we divided up that harvest period into 15-day intervals. We wanted a new patch of sweet corn every 15 days. And you can see it's very visual in this example, that you can see that the sowing date interval, the sowing date interval really changes a lot. It starts at 23 days between the first and the second sweet corn, and it's ending up at 9 days. And what I've done there to make that more useful is each of the bits of data from the columns on the left is one of those square blocks, and the Excel program has kind of made this zigzaggy line, which is hard to work with. So what you want to do is take a pencil and kind of swoop over the graph a few times and then finally actually do it with the pencil point on the paper, and you aim to get the same number of points above the line as below, and that gives you a much more usable smooth line, because you're taking out really the variations that are to do with the weather changing from year to year, and also the possibility that you used a different variety or the seed had different vigor from the year before. So we use things like this to figure out when to plan our sowing dates, because although to do fall gardening you want a late sowing date and you don't want to stop too soon, you want it to make sense in the sequence of the other crops that you've grown earlier that year. You don't want to be trucking along with your sequence of sowing dates and then find, oh, I should sow another one in 5 days. That wouldn't make such a good use of your time or your land, because you would end up with the last crop coming in too soon after the one before. You can also use, this is a chart from Virginia Co-op Extension Service. It's in their publication, their fall planting guide, and this is online, or you can get a paper copy from your extension office, unless the funding's been cut too much. This is not just warm weather crops, this has lots of different crops on it, and you can use it in any part of the Commonwealth. Across the top, there are boxes with numbers in, and the one that's numbered 00 is where you write in your average first frost date, and then to the left of that, it sort of works from the 00 box, 10, 20, 30. You write in those dates that are 10 days before, 20 days before, and so on. And then you can use this chart to see when the Extension Service would recommend that you sow and when you're likely to be harvesting as a result. There's also a formula. This also is in that same fall gardening guide, or fall planting guide. There's a formula for frost tender crops to calculate what's usually the last worthwhile sowing date. So you add together the number of days from seeding to harvest, and then you add in the average length of harvest period that you think would be worthwhile. It might be 14 days, but it might be 21 or 28, whatever you think is a worthwhile harvest period for you and your farm. And then you can add in 14 days, I think they call it the fall factor. It's to allow for the fact that the growing rate will slow down in the fall. And then you can add in 14 days to allow for the possibility that the first frost will be 2 weeks earlier than average, so you don't, have a bad surprise. But we use row cover on our tender crops, on our last planting of our tender crops, so we can be sure not to suffer from surprise early frosts. Here's a little example, yellow squash, or in the case of this photo, yellow and green squash. This is zephyr squash that we really like. It's maybe 50 days from seeding to harvest. We maybe want to harvest it for 21 days. If we add in 14 days to allow for the slowing down of growth, but we're not going to add in the 14 days for an early frost because we're definitely going to throw some row cover over if we get a frost forecast. So that would bring us, working back from our first fall frost date, which is about October the 14th, that would have us sowing our last squash on July 21st. But we reckon we want to sow a bit later than that. So we put the row cover on, even if it's just chilly. It doesn't have to be actually likely to frost. But just if you use the row cover when it's cool, you will keep it warmer under there so that the plants won't be suffering any slowdown of growth due to cooler fall weather. And so you can go another 2 weeks earlier than that. So we sow our last squash on August the 5th. And some people say, oh, but if you've got row cover on, the flowers won't get pollinated. And that's very true. But when you're at that end of the year, you don't need every single last flower to get pollinated. What you want to do is develop the fruits that are already pollinated. And if you get another warm, sunny spell, you can put the row covers aside and let some more pollination happen until the next cool spell. So yeah, August the 5th is our last for squash and cucumbers. We sow our last beans August the 3rd, our last edamame July 14th, and our last sweet corn July 16th. That's what works for us. It's Central Virginia. I think it's Zone 7 now. It used to be 6B on the USDA cold hardiness zones. There used to be like a little blob in the middle of Virginia that was 6B, whereas all around was Zone 7. Well, if you look on the updated map, that little blob has evaporated. So I think we're now Zone 7, so that's what works for us. Oh, did I skip one? Okay, yeah. So moving on to the cool weather spring and fall crops. I already mentioned those by name. There's a lot of things you can grow that you already grew in the spring that you can do again in the fall. What we do for this is we make ourselves a little chart of how many days it takes something to harvest. This can apply to any of these crops. And then we think about, if you want to harvest it between the middle of September and the middle of October, when would you need to sow it? And here's an example with kohlrabi. It's 58 days from sowing to harvest. It's hardly down to perhaps 15. You certainly don't have to have this finished by your average first frost date. It certainly wouldn't get down to 15 before the beginning of November for us. Later than that, probably. So it's clear that we can sow kohlrabi in early August and get a crop at the end of October. It doesn't take very long. And speaking of which, here's a list of fast-growing fall crops that you can use when you've not got very much time left in the season. Like maybe you had a crop failure, or maybe you had a planting failure, or something, or you've got some extra space. Some of these things can be ready really, really fast, mostly as sort of baby salad crops. If you've only got 30 to 35 days, you can still sow kale, arugula, radishes, and quite a few of those leafy Asian greens, particularly. Mizuna is very fast, arugula is very fast too. Maruba Santo and Tokyo Bacana are two very fast growing, light yellowy green, crunchy, ribbed Asian greens. Work well for us. Senposai is quite a hardy green. It's very tasty. It grows very quickly. Also spinach and chard, lettuce, some of those other things. There's a few things 35 to 45 days. Corn salad, we don't actually grow that because it's so small. I don't know. It doesn't seem worth it to me. There are things you can sow in that little window. If you've got as much as 60 days, you can still do the kohlrabi, as we saw. You can do beets and collards, turnips, and some of the smaller, fast-growing cabbages also. There's a bit of a market for mini cabbages. You plant them quite close together. Beets and carrots want similar kind of conditions. We do sow our beets in early August. Yeah, 8-1 it says there, right. Yeah, sometimes we do. Sometimes it's as much as a week later than that. They prefer soil temperatures of 50 to 85. The good news is that they germinate quite fast at 3.5 days at 86 Fahrenheit. So although if you've got very hot weather, it can be hard to think about how can you get it to 86. You only have to keep it that cool for 3.5 days and the beets will be up. So you can watch the weather forecast and look for a cooler spell or a nice rainfall. Or you could soak and pre-sprout the beet seed, which will make it come up even quicker. And that's a way of sort of getting around the problem of having hot weather when you want to sow. Make sure you keep the soil damp. Carrots, similar temperature range. They'll come up in 6 days at 80 Fahrenheit. I think I once had them come up in only 5 days. So they do come up fast in warm weather, but only if you keep the soil damp, otherwise they don't come up at all. We do a big planting of fall carrots in early August. We harvest them all in November and we store them for the winter. Spinach is one of the more challenging crops in the fall, or sowing it when it's hot is challenging. The optimum germination temperature is 70 Fahrenheit. The maximum is 85. So if your soil is hotter than that, just wait. Wait for it to cool down. Dead nettle, chickweed, and henbit, if you see any of those starting to germinate in the fall, you know that the soil has cooled down enough that the spinach will germinate. So that's an easy way to stop yourself from sowing it when it's too hot. Also, of course, a soil thermometer is very useful. What we do is we pre-sprout the seeds for a week, which gets them growing, gets around that problem of the germination temperature. They're actually very easy to sprout. You just soak them overnight maybe, then strain off the water, put the jar in the fridge, and you don't even really need to rinse. We don't. We just leave them in the fridge for a week, and occasionally we turn the jar around a quarter turn if we remember when we go by. But they will grow pretty easily. You don't want to grow the shoots on them too long because then they could more easily get damaged when you plant them. So not more than a week. So we love spinach very much, so we try to sow sprouted spinach on the 1st of September, unless it's really, really hot, in which case we delay a bit. Another thing you can do if you're really wanting some spinachy taste, but it's just not cool enough yet, is to sow Swiss chard, or the one that tastes more like spinach and looks more like spinach than chard does is called leaf beet or perennial spinach or perennial leaf beet or some name like that. It's a thin-ribbed chard. It is a chard, it isn't spinach, but it's the closest thing that I've tried to spinach in flavour. Peas can make a good fall crop provided you start early enough, because the mature plants are not very frost tolerant. They're more easily killed than little seedlings are. So you want to make sure you started in good time, that you've got mature plants and mature pods of peas before the frost. Lettuce is the other biggest challenge, along with spinach, for sowing and germinating in hot weather. The optimum germination temperature for spinach is 75 Fahrenheit. It will come up quickly, so if you can keep it, whoop, let's go back. You can keep it that cool for a little while. Just keep watering. What I do is I sow the lettuce in the evening. I keep the soil covered. We do transplants. This is how we get around it, keeping it cool. We keep the area that we're going to sow in covered in burlap sacks, and we keep them damp. So that helps cool the soil ahead of time. And then we sow, and then cover the seed over with soil, not very deep, but a little bit. And then water with cold water. Don't use a watering can full of water that's been sitting around all day, but cool water. And what I do is I line up ice cubes along the top, and then put the shade cloth over. If you want to get a sequence of lettuce, you want to sow every 6 or 7 days in June and July, down to 5 days in early August, 3 days in late August, and then there's this rather tedious 3 weeks where you sow every other day until you get to the equinox, and then you can back off and sow every 3 days. And that will give you an even supply, if all goes well and you manage to get it all germinated. Yeah, let's keep moving here. It's a surprise to many people to find that most brassicas will germinate quite well in hot soil, unlike spinach and lettuce, for instance. Turnips, winter radishes, daikon, some of the Asian greens will come up just in a couple of days at quite hot temperatures. The traditional leafy brassicas, cabbage, broccoli, collards, they don't do so well over 86, though, so don't expect miracles there. What we do for our broccoli, cabbage, kale and collards in fall is we don't do direct sowing because we don't have the ability to water long rows reliably and well. So we do transplants. You can do that using plug flats or open flats. Watch out for flea beetles though. Maybe keep your flats up on a bench. The flea beetles don't jump that high. But what we do is we do bare root transplants from an open outdoor nursery seed bed. The reasons that works for us is that we put our seed bed somewhere we're going to pass by every day, and so we make sure to keep them watered. And we find that having the seedlings growing in the soil means they can withstand a little bit of drying out, more drying out than they could if they were in flats, because they've got all the rest of that soil to spread their roots out in and to find dampness wherever it is. So it works for us to use this method. We have an 8-week program for sowing our fall brassicas. The most intensive are the first 3-4 weeks. I started last Friday, June 21st I started. So the first week we sow broccoli and cabbage, the second week we sow more broccoli and cabbage, and we also sow the Asian greens that we're going to grow in the fall. And then the week after that we do more Asian greens, and we do some collards, and then we do some more collards and some kohlrabi, and so on. And each week, I kind of make a program to do this the same day each week, and I visit the previous week's plants, and I weed them and thin them, and I see how the germination was, and if something hasn't come up well, I re-sow. And our rough formula is that we sow a foot of seed bed space for every 12 or 15 feet that we're going to plant out. So it's quite a high rate of seeds, really. And this is a piece of our fall brassica planting spreadsheet. It's the first couple of weeks. So we have all this planned out ahead of time. So we make the labels, we measure out the spaces, we put the labels in the ground, and then we sow the seeds and water them and cover them over. When it comes time to transplant, we aim to transplant 4 true leaves, which is only 3 or 4 weeks old in the fall. They grow so much faster than in the spring. And you don't want to be trying to plant out really big plants, as you probably know. They will wilt in hot weather and possibly keel over and die. So if you find yourself, I mean, this happens to us sometimes, you know, you get rain when you don't want it, or your machinery is broken down or something. If you find yourself transplanting bigger than ideal plants, what we do is break off some of the lower leaves so that there's less less leaf to lose water from. We like kale a lot. We like it so much that we couldn't possibly transplant it all. It would be way too many plants. So what we do is a hybrid system between, we do some direct sowing, and then we sort of move plants around to fill the gaps by transplanting. So what we do is we sow 2 beds every 6 days. We do that 3 times, or if necessary, 4 or 5 times. So we can easily keep 2 beds watered well, but we couldn't really keep 6, 7, 8 beds watered well. Our irrigation is just not, it's not that available, and maybe our attention also, to be honest. So we do 2 beds, we keep those watered till the seedlings emerge, and then by that time, 6 days later, we're sowing another 2 beds. It's easier, it's less to keep track of at any one moment. And then we thin the beds once the plants are up a bit. We dig out some, we reuse some of the plants that we take out of the gaps. Anywhere with patchy germination, or if we're really lucky, it means we don't have to direct sow so many beds, and we can get more ones established earlier. Oh yeah, I did want to say a bit about protection from pests, because this is one of the challenges of fall vegetable growing, especially with brassicas, for us anyway, and that is that pest numbers kind of built up during the summer. We have a lot of harlequin bugs, and we only use organic methods. Sometimes we have cabbage worms, although we have what I heard Barbara Pleasance at a workshop describe as good wasp coverage. We have great wasp coverage. The wasps eat the caterpillars. You can see them flying in on the cabbages and picking up the caterpillars and flying off with them. So we don't get much trouble with the cabbage worm usually. Sometimes we get flea beetles, sometimes we don't. But we've recently discovered this Protect Net mesh. We buy it from Purple Mountain Organics in Maryland, and you're nodding, you've used it too. It's great. It's nylon. It is expensive, but it should have a longer life than row cover by quite a few times. It lets a lot more light in compared to row cover. The airflow is a lot better, which is important during hot, muggy weather, because you don't want your plants to keel over with horrible fungal diseases. And one of the things that's great for us is you can actually see through it. So when you're going along and watering, or you're walking by, you can look at it and you can see, is there a disaster brewing under here? I mean, I had one year in the past when we still used row cover over our seed beds rather than this Protect Net. And I had sown the cabbage and the broccoli, and I'd watered it daily, and I assumed everything was fine. And the next week, when I opened up the row cover, there'd been multiplication of flea beetles under there that I hadn't been aware of, and I had a bad disaster on my hands. But with the Protect Net, you can see right through it. You can see, is stuff growing? Are there bugs hopping around under there that shouldn't have been in there? It's nice to work with. It drapes easily. It's not stiff and awkward. It drapes easily. So it's fairly easy to batten it down around the edges to keep bugs out. Once we've transplanted the crops, we're still using row cover for the transplanted crops. We've only got a little bit of the Protect Net so far. We use the 84-inch wide row cover. You could use the Protect Net for this too. We plant our rows of broccoli and cabbage, say 34 inches apart, and you can get 2 rows under a tunnel that you can make with the cover. Okay, on to possible cold hardy crops to overwinter. I won't spend long on this because this could be a whole other topic in its own right, and really this is about fall vegetable production. But cabbage, carrots, collards, garlic, kale, leeks, lettuce, potato, onions, parsnips, and spinach will all overwinter outdoors for us. Leeks and parsnips, they're slow growing. It's too late to start them in the fall, so get about those. If you're in a milder climate than we are, you could do peas as an overwinter crop. We can't. The advantage of having overwintered crops are that you can harvest some during the winter, but also once you get to early spring, those plants will start producing much quicker than anything you could start in the spring, and they're growing like big leaves. very straight away. And if you have, as we had this year, we had a really wet March. We couldn't get out there to disc or till or work the soil at all for quite a while. But we were able to harvest kale because it was already there in the ground. So it can be insurance against bad spring weather. Garlic is a very valuable overwintering crop that you want to plant in the fall. I believe that the best conditions under which to plant garlic are when the 9 a.m. soil temperature is 50 degrees Fahrenheit at 4 inches deep. That's usually the kind of length of the probe on a soil thermometer. I would definitely recommend getting a soil thermometer if you haven't already got one, because with the climate and the weather being strange, and we're not going to be able to really rely on calendars so much to decide when to plant. We're not really going to be able to continue to do it the way Grandad did it. We're going to need to look at what the conditions are actually like, and a soil thermometer is one way to do that. What we do is we plant the cloves of garlic, we cover them over with soil, and then we hand roll out big round bales of hay, and the garlic will come up nicely through the mulch. It will save us a lot of weeding. And the roots will grow very nicely whenever the ground isn't frozen, which in our climate is not often at all, especially underneath mulch. It's just not going to freeze much. So you can get very good root growth happening. And the tops will grow whenever the temperature is above 40 Fahrenheit. So that's kind of similar to spinach. It doesn't have to be very warm for it to make some growth. So in choosing the planting date for garlic, you don't want to be too late. Otherwise, they won't be able to make good root growth, and you'll get too much winter losses. If you plant too early, though, on the other hand, you'll get too much lush top growth, and that will freeze down too easily. So you're hoping for a balance where you get a little bit of top growth, and so when you get to spring, it can grow really fast then. In our experience, with our hardneck garlic, most years it will get frozen back. The tops will get frozen back once. Sometimes they get frozen back twice. But if they get frozen back once, they don't really seem to suffer from it. The growing point is mostly sort of down in the mulch. It doesn't get killed off. It just grows some more leaves, and they're fine. When it gets frozen back twice, we feel a bit sad, because usually the yield is decreased, but they still don't die. Multiplier onions are they're an interesting crop to grow. You plant them around about the same time as garlic, and you harvest them about the same time as garlic, and you treat them similarly like we mulch over the top of the beds in the same way that we do with garlic. So a little bit about dealing with the challenges of hot weather, and then a bit about cold weather, and then a bit about hoop houses. It's important to choose good varieties. Read the descriptions in the catalogue carefully, and of course you'll be looking for flavour and productivity, but also look for disease resistance and cold hardiness for fall crops, because you may have disease build up by that point, and you probably will be going into colder weather. If you can direct seed rather than transplant, you will get better cold hardiness. Probably because there's less root damage. Well, there isn't any root damage, the roots just grow. Good soil prep is important, watering is important. You can plant, it's recommended to plant seeds a bit deeper than you would in the spring. In the spring you don't want to plant too deep, because they will be cold down there, and then the seeds may rot. This isn't the situation in late summer and fall. The soil is plenty warm enough. There's a bit more moisture lower down, so if you plant a little bit deeper, you'll get better results. You could try sunken furrows. So you make a furrow a little bit deeper than usual, sow the seeds and only partially fill, and that way the little sunken furrow will kind of catch the dew and any moisture that's going. A bit more about watering. Pre-watering the furrows for large seeded crops works very well for us. We do this for sweet corn, and we do it for beans. So you make a furrow a little bit deeper than you might otherwise. Take a hose, not full strength blast of water, but quite generous amount of water, walk along and fill that furrow up until it's almost overflowing. And then when the water subsides, just drop the seeds down in the mud and then bring the soil and cover it over. And you have given that seed all the water it needs to get up above the ground. And it's right there where the seed needs it. So it's a bit like, so it means we sow our sweet corn by hand, which takes a bit more time. But then we're sowing several varieties anyway, and people love planting corn. So it's not, it's not such a problem, and it means that we've dealt with the watering problem and we get much more even germination than we would. For small seeded crops that are close planted, you'll often want to use some kind of overhead watering, because unless you've got very close emitters on your drip tape, it's hard to get the row evenly watered. And anything you can do to use cold water rather than skimming the top of a pond or out of a barrel will help cool things down for those crops that need cooler soil. There are tables in New Seed Starters Handbook and Knott's Vegetable Growers Handbook about ideal germination temperatures, maximum, minimum germination temperatures, and number of days for seedlings to emerge at different temperatures. And these are really worth having because you'll know what to expect and you'll know immediately if something's gone wrong. You can try shading where you're going to sow if it's too hot. You can, as I already described, using a nursery seed bed. If outdoor sowing just seems impossible, you can start seedlings. You can start them in your house. You can take a flat of spinach, put it in a loose, open plastic bag, put it in your refrigerator. The plastic bag stops the compost dropping on your leftovers, or the quiche you just baked, whatever. Plug flats or soil blocks are better than open flats because there's less transplant shock. And then before you know it, we're dealing with the challenges of cold weather. Often those first few frosts are quite light and are often followed by several weeks of nice warmer weather. So if you can keep your crops alive through a couple of frosts, you can harvest a lot more from them. Unless you've reached the exhaustion point we call prey for a killing frost. Sometimes you just want to stomp on those crops, don't you? Seaweed sprays can help toughen up the cell walls. You can spray them a few days ahead of expected frosts. If you've got tall plants like tomatoes that you want to protect from frost, you can take out the stakes and cages and lie the plants down and cover them over with row cover. We prepare this frost alert card, which is this. We keep this in the shed pinned on the board, and so if you're out there in the afternoon and you're sort of looking at the sky and you're thinking, oh, maybe it's going to frost tonight, this is a quick reference card we have that tells us, do this, do this, do this, do this, so you don't have to sort of think about it. A list of things to cover, a list of things to harvest if you can't or won't be covering them. Like we won't cover our eggplants, we're just not going to. But we'll go out and harvest all the ones that are decent enough to eat. With peppers, we've discovered this useful harvesting technique. Often it's just the very top of the pepper plant that gets frozen. So if you walk along the row and you look down on the peppers and you harvest the ones that are exposed to the sky, that are not protected by any foliage, whatever the color of them, you just harvest those ones and you leave the ones lower down on the plant. The frost takes off the top of the plant, and then you get some more nice weather and some more peppers ripen up and get bigger. And next time there's a frost, you do the same thing again. You can gradually work your way down the plant. It sort of spreads out the harvest and makes that more manageable, as well as increases the harvest. Checking the winter squash and bringing in any that are ready, that are very exposed. Setting up sprinklers for the night. We use this on tomatoes and peppers sometimes, and any clusters of beds with high value crops. This is an impressive picture. Southern Exposure Seed Exchange lent me this slide, or lent me this picture. This is a row of tomatoes that are got string weaving between T-posts. These plants survived. You set the overnight sprinklers, you turn the sprinklers on just before it gets to frost temperature. You leave the sprinklers on all night long, and you wait until the sun comes up and the temperatures are warming above 32 again, and then you stop and you turn off the water. And how this works is that water, when it freezes, actually gives out heat. When it's changing from liquid to solid, it gives out some heat to the plants. This seems so counterintuitive, but I tell you, it really, really works. Also, the ice forms a kind of shell around the leaves of the plants and protects them from any further chilling. So you can do this if you're having warm frost. What does that mean? Am I supposed to do something? No. Of course, you couldn't do this night after night after night because your soil would be waterlogged, but it can save you, it can give you a bit longer. Okay, onto the hoop house. If you haven't got a hoop house, try your hardest to get one. They're wonderful. You've probably seen the ones here. The rate of growth of cold weather crops is much, much faster inside. The quality of the crops is much better, especially the leafy greens. For instance, if you're growing a crop of turnips, you can harvest and use those turnip greens, and they will be beautiful. They won't be all weather-beaten and scarred. They'll be very nice. Another thing that's been found, I don't know if this was predicted by anybody before hoop houses became popular, but it's been found that plants can actually survive colder night temperatures in the hoop house than they could survive outside. The theory is that the warmer daytime temperatures help the plants recover. I don't know the science behind it, but it certainly seems to be true that plants can get very cold in there. You can walk in and they can be frozen really hard, but you just wait for it to warm up a bit and they're fine. Another thing is that working in there is so delightful. You know, you have to take off your hat and your gloves, and then you have to take off your scarf and your coat, and then you have to take off your sweater as the day warms up with the sunshine. It's so much nicer than messing about with frozen row covers and whatever it is that's holding them down outdoors. Here's an overview of the crops we grow in the winter in our hoop house. Mostly salad crops, cooking greens, some turnips and radishes and scallions. Also some bare root transplants that we will put outside in the spring. Like we do our bulb onions over winter in the hoop house. And in January we start spinach and kale and collards for outside. And it's so easy growing them inside in the hoop house. Things like we grow spinach in our hoop house as well as outside. It grows much faster in the hoop house. We just harvest whichever is biggest, you know. We look at the stuff outside, we look at the stuff inside. Which shall we harvest today? Unless the weather is horrible, and then we just stay inside and harvest. It's so nice. We start out in September. We do some sowings in an outdoor seed bed, and then we transfer those plants, transplant them into the hoop house. And that means that the seedlings are outdoors, they get cooler temperatures to help them get them started, and it also means that whatever summer crops we have in the hoop house get a few more weeks to mature than they would get if we were having to clear them to make way for our fall and winter crops. So we start outside. September the 15th, we sow 10 varieties of hardy leaf lettuce, and then some of these Asian greens, pak choi, Chinese cabbage, zucchini savoy, Tokyo bacana, maruba santo I mentioned already, also some chard. And then the next week we sow the Russian kales, yet more lettuce, senposai, more zucchini savoy, mizuna and arugula. We do transplant the first round of arugula. We use hoops and row cover on our outdoor seed beds, or row cover or protect net. At the end of September, we clear a bed in the hoop house and work it up, and we transplant in some of those seedlings. The transplants are just 2 weeks old. The Tokyo bacana, maruba santo, they grow very, very fast. You want to transplant them when they're only 2 weeks old. The Chinese cabbage, some of these others are 3 weeks old. In the middle of October, we clear another bed and we plant the first round of lettuce and chard. And then at the end of October, we do the second round of lettuce and the rest of those outdoor sown crops. We do also direct sow in our hoop house. We do some spinach, pre-sprouted like I already described for outdoors. We do some of that in the hoop house. We also sow radishes and scallions, bull's blood beet greens, beet reds, and tatsoi. And then later on we do baby salad mix, baby lettuce mix, more spinach, more chard. We've also started to do find a little area somewhere and sow some filler lettuces and Asian greens and spinach. Just a few crosswise rows in a bed somewhere. And this means that whenever a gap occurs in the hoop house, we can take some of those filler plants and fill the gaps. And this means we can get maximum use of that wonderful growing space. From November the 10th on, November we sow the most turnips. Yeah, it's a line there. From November the 10th on, the whole place is filled. And after that, as we harvest something, we replace it with something else. We have a long and complex hoop house planting schedule. The September to December part is in this mythical handout that you haven't seen. It's similar to the outdoor planting schedule in some ways. We do take more notes, and we've started trying to keep notes on when we start harvesting and when we finish harvesting, so we can do a closer use of our hoop house and not have any areas standing empty. We also look at hoop house succession planting. So you can see we sowed 2 rounds of chard, 2 rounds of lettuce mix. Oh, we did 3 this winter, last winter. We do 5 rounds of radishes. We do 6 rounds of spinach. So fairly frequently we're sowing or transplanting some new stuff. Okay, I've got some resources here. These are some good websites that I really like using. Atra, SARE, also extension.org has a big and growing and developing section on organic production that's really top-notch information. Here's some more websites. The fall planting guide that I mentioned. Debbie Roos Growing Small Farms. She's in North Carolina, but it's not so different from here. She really keeps on top of things. There's Purple Mountain Organics to make the Protect Net. There's Brad Burkford's slideshow that I came across while I was posting mine on crop rotations and succession crops. What else? And here's some books that I really recommend. This first one is a book from the UK. It's quite old now, but you can buy it used pretty cheap online. Knott's Handbook, pretty expensive, but it's like charts on charts. Seed Starter's Handbook is wonderful. The Organic Farmer's Business Handbook, Sustainable Vegetable Production from Start to Market, Elliot Coleman's books, Extending the Season from Growing for Market, and The Heirloom Gardener by Jeffrey Goss. Yeah, that's the end, and there's my contact information. If you want to email me, you can. I don't know how, I think we're probably like overrunning on the time. We've got 2 more speakers. How are we doing for time? Should we take questions or should we? A couple of questions? Yeah. The mythical handout, right. The mythical handout. You can sign up and I will email it to you. If you don't do email, I have a few paper copies. Yeah, back there. What are we doing for fertilization and cover crops? We have a big compost making program. I live at Twin Oaks Community, as I might have said. One of our businesses is making tofu. It's made from soybeans. There's a waste product of that. It's called okara. We use the okara and sawdust and wood chips and kitchen scraps and weeds, and we make a lot of compost. We use that a lot. We do a lot of cover crops, but boy, that's a whole subject in itself, isn't it? We do a lot of winter cover cropping. We do some short-term summer cover crops like buckwheat and soybeans. We also, in our 10-year rotation, we keep one plot for an all-year green fallow. It's usually clovers, but if something goes wrong with the clovers, we do sorghum Sudan and soybeans. So yeah, we do all that sort of thing. I just couldn't fit it into this title. Yeah, you have that. The hay. Yeah, we do produce it. We grow our own hay. Yeah. All right. Thank you.